The wind carried more grit than promise across the cracked plains of West Texas. Summer of 1882 had scorched the land bone dry, and for 3 long months, the sky refused to give a drop of mercy. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The sun blazed without pity, baking the earth until it split wide like old saddle leather, carving jagged lines that reached clear to the horizon. Tumbleweeds tumbled past forsaken cabins, skeletons of broken dreams scattered under the weight of frontier life. Abigail Monroe stood on the porch of her weather-worn shack, one hand shading her eyes from the glare, the other clenched around a bucket handle until her knuckles blanched white. At 26, she looked older. Grief and hardship chiseling her face into something solemnly beautiful, like stone carved by years of storm. Her dark hair, once her vanity, was tied back in a practical knot, streaked early with silver along the temples. The black dress she clung to had faded to a ghostly gray after endless washings, yet she would not discard it. It was all she had left of mourning. 8 months had passed since Ethan Cole, her husband, had met death. Sudden and cruel. He'd been felling timber in the canyon when the rope snapped. Folks said he hadn't felt pain, but Abigail knew that was just the kind of lie folks told widows. She had seen him crushed beneath tons of fallen wood, and that picture haunted her nights. In a single heartbeat, she had gone from wife to widow, from being sheltered to becoming the one who must shelter, with 40 stubborn acres and a 4-year-old boy depending on her. "Mama, the chickens are actin' strange again," little Caleb called from the coop, his voice high with worry. He bore his father's sandy hair, but carried his mother's steady gray eyes that had already seen too much for such a young child. "They're only thirsty, sweetheart," Abigail answered, though she knew better. The well was running low, and she'd have to climb down again soon. Every descent into that black hole felt like tempting fate itself. One slip, one rotten plank, and Caleb would be left an orphan. She trudged to the well, her boots crunching on dust-hard earth. The rope burned her palms as she lowered the bucket, counting the long seconds, until she heard the faint splash. Too many seconds. The waterline was sinking fast, just like Hank Dobbs had warned. Without water, the herd would die. Without the herd, there'd be nothing come autumn. And without money, she shoved the thought aside. There'd be nothing at all. She dragged up a bucket barely half filled with muddy water. Her 20 head of longhorns already showed ribs sharp through their hides. They stood dull-eyed in the thinnest shade they could find, the fight gone out of them under the unrelenting sun. 3 calves had already dropped this season, their frail bodies claimed by the merciless land. Each loss tightened the coffin lid on her independence. "Mrs. Monroe." The voice startled her. Silas Whitmore. The banksman leaned against her gate, his town clothes wilted in the heat, his narrow frame and watchful eyes giving him the look of a vulture circling over weakness. "Mr. Whitmore," she said coolly, making no move to invite him in. "What brings you out here in this blaze? Concerned for your welfare, ma'am," he replied, tipping his hat in a gesture that might have passed for courtesy, if not for the hungry gleam behind his eyes. "The bank's been reviewing accounts, and with your husband gone, my husband's death don't change my ability to work this land." Abigail cut in her voice, steady, though fear coiled low in her belly. "Of course not," Whitmore agreed too quickly. "But a woman alone with a young boy, perhaps you'd consider selling. I could fetch you a fair price enough to set you up in town, maybe open a tidy little shop." "This is my son's birthright," she answered firmly. "I'll not sell." Whitmore's smile thinned. "Next payment comes due in 2 months. I do hope you'll have it, Mrs. Monroe." He settled his hat back on his head and turned, then paused. Oh, and I heard about your trouble at Loretta Jane Hollis's store yesterday. Something about your credit heat burned her cheeks. It was true she had been refused when trying to buy feed sent off empty-handed, while the townsfolk whispered and stared. "Good day, Mr. Whitmore," she said coldly. When he rode off, Abigail slumped against the well, shame and anger gnawing at her. Talk in town was growing louder. A widow running stock was rare enough, but one who wore men's trousers to rope cattle and scorned the safety of remarriage was near scandalous. Only last Sunday, Clara May Whitlow had slid to another pew rather than sit beside her at church, as though widowhood itself might spread like sickness. The sun sank low, washing the sky in amber and crimson when she saw the rider. A dark speck against the glow, moving slow, horse and man, both worn thin. Her hand slid to the rifle, resting against the porch rail. Strangers seldom brought good news, least of all to a woman on her own. As he drew near, details sharpened a bay gelding dusty and lathered limping on its front leg. The rider sat tall despite exhaustion, shoulders broad beneath a faded blue shirt, worn leather chaps, and a red bandana bleached nearly pink. No local hand she recognized, just a trail-tough cowboy. He pulled up at a respectful distance, pushed back his hat, revealing dark hair falling over his brow and eyes pale as winter sky blue turned almost gray. Those eyes carried a weariness deeper than road dust, the kind born from too many miles and too many memories. "Evening, ma'am," he said, voice rough from silence and trail dust. "Name's Wyatt McGraw. Hate to trouble you, but my horse lost a shoe 5 miles back. Wondered if you might spare the use of your tools to fix it. I can pay for the trouble." Abigail studied him with care. The holster at his hip was scuffed, yet solid, the mark of a man who respected his weapon, but wasn't itching for a fight. His hands rested easy on the saddle horn, rough with calluses, yet kept clean. Something in his bearing quiet, measured respectful, despite the trail-worn look eased the knot of suspicion in her chest. "There's a forge in the barn," she said at last, her voice steady, though she stopped short of speaking Ethan Cole's name to this stranger. "I can handle a horseshoe," Wyatt McGraw replied. "If you've got the tools, I'll manage. And if you've got chores that need doing, I'll trade sweat for supper. Been living off jerky, and memories too long." Caleb had crept out onto the porch, peeking around his mother's skirts at the stranger. Wyatt tipped his hat with a gentle nod that made the boy duck back shy. "Fine boy you've got, Wyatt observed. Looks about the age of my nephew back in Missouri." The mention of family back east softened another edge of Abigail's wariness. Drifters didn't usually speak of kin. "The forge is in the barn," she repeated. "There's a pump by the door for water. Supper's at sundown. Just beans and cornbread. Ma'am, after 3 weeks on the trail, beans and cornbread might as well be steak and champagne," he said. He swung carefully down from the saddle, favoring his left side, in a way that spoke of an old hurt more than fresh pain. As he led the gelding toward the barn, Abigail noticed the way he moved, watchful, but not threatening, like a man who'd survived by reading signs most folks missed. Mama Caleb whispered, tugging at her dress. "Is he stayin'? Just for supper?" Abigail said firmly. Still, a tightness stirred in her chest as she watched the stranger step into the barn's shadow. The sunset bled gold and crimson across the horizon. For a fleeting heartbeat, she let herself imagine what it might feel like, not to face every battle alone. But hope was a dangerous thing for a widow. Survival demanded all she had, and hope cost too much. Tomorrow he'd ride on, and she'd be left with nothing but her will against the drought, the bank, and the desert itself. Still, when she put beans in the pot that night, she added an extra cup. She cut the cornbread thicker enough for a hungry traveler. It's only charity, she told herself, nothing more. Morning light crept across the cabin floorboards, long shadows stretching over the rough-hewn planks. Abigail had been awake since before dawn, but this day felt different. The knowledge of a stranger in her barn had her senses sharpened. She'd let Wyatt stay after he not only fixed his horse's shoe, but mended a broken gate and patched the chicken coop all before supper. Through the window she saw him step into the early sun, stretching wide. He splashed water over his face at the pump streams running down his jaw and throat. When his gaze flicked toward the cabin, she darted back, cheeks burning at being caught staring. "Is the man still here, Mama?" Caleb asked from his little bed in the corner. "Mr. McGraw," she corrected softly. "And yes, he's still here. Can he stay?" "He fixed my wooden horse." Caleb held up the toy whole again after weeks of being broken. Her throat tightened. Ethan had carved that horse for Caleb's 3rd birthday. She'd tried to mend it herself, but never managed. "We'll see," she answered, her usual way of softening a likely no. A knock at the door cut short her thoughts. Wyatt stood there, hat in hand, respectfully outside the threshold. "Morning, Mrs. Monroe. I wanted to thank you for your kindness and settle my debt before I ride on. You mended the gate and the coop," Abigail said. "That makes a square." He studied her, those pale eyes seeming to see more than she liked. "That roof won't hold when winter storms roll in. The corral fence needs fixing too. And if I'm not mistaken, your windmill hasn't turned in months." All true, and all things she'd been putting off, hoping somehow to manage with her own hands. "That's not your worry, Mr. McGraw." "Could be," he answered, shifting his weight, slow, deliberate. "I'm in no hurry to be anywhere. If you could use a hand for a spell, I'll work for food and a bunk in the barn. That hayloft's better than plenty of beds I've known." Abigail knew she should refuse. Curtains in town had likely twitched the moment he rode in, but the list of repairs grew by the day, and pride wouldn't feed Caleb come winter. "I can't pay wages," she said stiffly. "Never asked for any," Wyatt replied, settling his hat back in place. "I'll start on the roof if that suits you." And so began what she told herself would be no more than a few days. But days turned to a week, then 2. Wyatt McGraw proved himself everything he claimed, a steady worker, never lazy, never prying. He ate at her table but slipped back to the barn, soon after speaking little, unless spoken to. It was Caleb who cracked his reserve first. The boy followed him like a shadow, questions spilling one after another, and Wyatt surprisingly always answered with patience. The boy had taken to shadowing him everywhere, firing off questions as quick as a 6-gun, and Wyatt McGraw surprisingly answered each one with patience. "Were you in the war?" Caleb asked one evening, swinging his legs as they sat on the porch after supper. The question made Abigail Monroe stiffen, but Wyatt only nodded slowly. "I was little more than a boy myself, really. Not much older than Mama, reckon." "That's true. Did you kill anyone, Caleb?" Abigail scolded, her voice sharp. Wyatt lifted a hand gently. "It's fair coming from a boy." "Yes, son, I did. And it's nothing I boast of. War turns men into something they spend the rest of their days trying to forget." Abigail saw shadows deepen across his face and understood a piece of what carved that bone-deep weariness in his eyes. She had been only 16 when the war ended, had seen the men who returned, scarred, broken, or changed beyond recognition. Some never came back at all. The next morning brought trouble riding in on 3 horses from town. Abigail recognized them instantly. Clint Barrow, the saloon man, face flushed with whiskey. Virgil Haskins, the storekeeper, narrow-faced and sour. And Parson Hugh Latham, with pious concern written across his features. Abigail smoothed her apron, lifted her chin, and stepped out to the porch. "Gentlemen," she said coolly. "What brings you this far?" Barrow's booming voice came first. "Heard you took on a hired hand, Widow Monroe. I've got help with repairs, yes, Abigail replied. In your barn eating at your table. Haskins added, thin lips drawn tight. People are talking. People always do, she shot back. Never yet seen gossip bring rain or mend a fence. Parson Latham stepped forward, tone dripping with condescension. Mrs. Monroe, we're concerned for your reputation. A young widow. A strange man under your roof. Surely you see how it looks. What I see, Abigail said, her voice sharp as prairie wind, is that none of you offered to fix my roof when it leaked, or my fence when it fell. Mr. McGraw works for a meal and barn space. Nothing more. Now see here, Barrow started, but stopped when Wyatt rounded the corner, hammer in hand. He'd heard every word. Morning, gentlemen, he said mildly, though the set of his shoulders made the three men uneasy. Fine day to patch a roof, unless you came to lend a hand. Otherwise, best let me get back to it. The silence that followed was taut as a drawn bowstring. Wyatt stood calm but ready, and Abigail realized with a start that he was a man who'd stared down worse than town busybodies. We only wish what's best, Parson Latham muttered, already edging back toward his horse. I'm sure you do, Wyatt replied evenly. And I'm sure Mrs. Monroe appreciates neighbors watching over her so close. Good day. When they rode off, Abigail found her hands trembling. They'll stir up trouble, she whispered. Maybe Wyatt said. But men who ride in packs to lean on a woman usually scatter when met head-on. He hesitated, then added, If my staying brings you grief, I'll move on. No. The word escaped her too fast, her cheeks flushing. That is, there's still work that needs doing. That night after Caleb was asleep, they sat by the fire. Wyatt finally spoke of his past. He had once owned a ranch in Kansas, and a wife, Savannah Rose, who died of fever while he was away driving cattle. Unable to face the memories, he sold everything and drifted ever since. 5 years now, he said quietly, staring into the flames. Thought I was searching for something, but maybe I've just been running. Running is sometimes all a person can manage, Abigail admitted. When Ethan died, I wanted to run too. Pack up Caleb and go east to my sister Eleanor. But this land, it's all Caleb has left of his father. It's good land, Wyatt said firmly. Worth fighting for, especially against drought and against wagging tongues. That's when it matters most. He looked at her directly. You're stronger than you know, Abigail Monroe. It was the first time he had spoken her name, and something electric passed through her. She turned away first, rising abruptly. It's late. That night, she lay in bed not dreaming of Ethan crushed beneath timber, but of pale blue eyes and the steady rhythm of hammering on a roof, strong and sure as a heartbeat. By morning, she baked extra biscuits and added a precious spoonful of jam to Wyatt's plate. It was a small gesture, but when he smiled, truly smiled, reaching his weary eyes, something inside her cracked open like parched earth after rain. Hope. She realized with awe and a little fear. She was beginning to hope again. Meanwhile, the drought gripped the land tighter like a fist that refused to let go. By the 3rd week of Wyatt McGraw's stay, the grass had lost all color, fading from yellow to brittle gray, crumbling into dust under the hooves of the starving herd. The well demanded twice the rope and poles to draw up half the water, and Abigail Monroe had been forced to ration even what they drank. We'll lose every one of them if we don't drive them out, Wyatt said one evening, watching the sunset bleed copper and ash across the dying pasture. The cattle stood hollow-eyed in the corral ribs jutting sharp, beneath hides gone dull. Abigail folded her arms across her chest, shoulders stiff. The nearest water's Clear Creek, she answered. 20 miles through Carson's Gulch. 2 days with cattle in this shape. Then we'd best leave tomorrow, Wyatt said simply. I'll manage them if you... We go together or not at all. Abigail cut in. These cattle are mine. My responsibility. He studied her in silence, then gave a short nod. Caleb can stay with Martha Dobbs. She owes me after I helped bring her twins into the world last spring. That evening they worked by lantern light, mending water bags, checking tack, and packing what little food they could spare. Caleb watched wide-eyed and solemn as Abigail explained she'd be gone a few days. You'll come back, he whispered, too young for such heavy fear. Abigail knelt, holding him close. I'll always come back to you, sweet boy. Always. They left before dawn, the herd stumbling too weak to bellow more than thin complaints. Abigail rode her stout mare Bess, while Wyatt guided Ethan Cole's old gelding like he'd been born in the saddle. The first day dragged on in a haze of dust and heat, stopping often so the cattle wouldn't collapse. That night they camped in a box canyon. Wyatt built the fire steady while Abigail cared for the horses. Stars pricked the sky, scattering silver across endless black. And for a moment the harsh world felt far away. You handle cattle like you were raised to it, Wyatt said, passing her a tin cup of bitter coffee. My father, Jedediah Monroe, raised beef in Tennessee before the war, she answered. I could rope and ride before I could read. She hesitated, voice softening. Ethan never approved of it, said it wasn't fitting for a woman. Then Ethan was a fool, Wyatt said bluntly, then caught himself. Forgive me, I shouldn't speak ill. He's dead, Abigail said with a shrug, though hurt flickered in her eyes. He was good in his way, but he wanted a wife content with cooking and sewing. She gestured at her worn trousers and dusty boots. He got something better, Wyatt corrected. A woman who could save his legacy when he couldn't. That's worth more than all the needlework in the world. They fell into a quiet ease until horses thundered out of the dark. Wyatt was on his feet instantly, hand on his colt. Easy there, friend, a voice called. 3 riders broke into the circle of firelight, and Abigail's heart dropped. At their head was Bill Carver, notorious for running cattle for the big outfits and taking what didn't belong to him. Well, well, Carver drawled, flashing tobacco-stained teeth. Wyatt McGraw, thought I left you back in Dodge. Wyatt's posture shifted loose but dangerous like a rattler coiled in dust. Carver, he said evenly. Still ridin' with scum, I see. That's unfriendly talk. Carver sneered, his gaze raking over Abigail in a way that turned her stomach. This your woman pretty thing to be draggin' through the desert. The lady's driving her herd to water, Wyatt said flat, no tremor in his tone. We're not looking for trouble. Cattle. One of Carver's young guns jeered. Those skeletons ain't worth spit, but maybe you got something else worth taking. Abigail rose slowly, her hand sliding to the rifle by her saddle. You're on my land, Mr. Carver. Move along. Your land, Carver mocked. Word is you're just a widow playing rancher. Maybe you need a real man to show you how it's done. What happened next was quicker than a blink. Wyatt's revolver cleared leather and fired the shot, punching a clean hole through Carver's hat, sending it spinning to the dirt. Next one goes lower, Wyatt said, almost conversational. The lady told you to move along. The air thickened with the taste of gunpowder and threat. Carver's face twisted with rage as he stooped to pick up his ruined hat. This ain't over, McGraw, he snarled. And it sure ain't over with you, widow woman. When the riders finally turned tail, Abigail realized she was shaking. Wyatt slid his gun back into its holster and touched her shoulder gently. You all right? You knew him before she pressed. Wyatt's jaw clenched. Back in Dodge, he was hassling a woman. I stepped in. Thought I'd seen the last of him. He'll be back. Maybe. Men like Carver talk big, but most are cowards. Still, we'd best keep watch tonight. They stood guard in turns, but dawn came without incident. The herd stumbled forward again, though both of them knew now they were racing against more than just thirst. By midday, a thin green line of trees broke the horizon, Clear Creek. The cattle caught scent of water and found new strength surging forward. Abigail let out a laugh, raw with relief, as they plunged into the shallow stream, heads dropping low to drink. We made it. She breathed, tears stinging her eyes. We did, Wyatt McGraw agreed, though his gaze never stopped sweeping the horizon. That afternoon they let the cattle rest in the green ribbon of grass along the creek, grateful for the rare abundance. As evening came on, Wyatt suggested they camp on the ridge where they'd see trouble before it came. Abigail Monroe agreed without hesitation. The run-in with Carver had shattered any illusion of safety. By the glow of a small fire, Wyatt finally spoke, voice rough with memory. "My wife, Savannah Rose. She was cut from the same cloth as you. Strong, determined. Could outride most men and never cared who knew it." His eyes softened in the firelight, shadows of grief flickering across his face. "When she died, fever took her quick. I sold everything. And drifted. Figured a man like me didn't deserve another chance." Abigail studied his profile, the grief etched deep. He went on. "But then I rode up to a widow's place, saw her fightin' tooth and nail to hold on to her boy's inheritance. Made me think maybe running ain't the answer. Maybe standing your ground for something worth keeping is." Their eyes locked across the flames, heat stronger than the fire passing between them. Abigail reached out without thinking, her hand finding his. Wyatt turned his palm fingers, closing tight around hers. "Wyatt," she whispered. "I know," he rasped. "I know all the reasons it's complicated, Abigail, but the words died as a shot cracked the night." Wyatt shoved her down, bullets whining overhead. The herd spooked, bawling and milling in panic. "Stay low!" he barked, drawing iron and firing at the muzzle flashes. Abigail scrambled for her rifle, her heart pounding like a war drum. Voices and hoofbeats rose in the dark. Carver had returned, and he'd brought friends. A round sparked off the rock beside her head. She squeezed off a shot, grateful for the lessons Ethan Cole had once drilled into her hands. The fight stretched endless, though it lasted only minutes, Wyatt shooting cool and steady, every bullet placed true, while Abigail kept the attackers from circling behind. At last a cry rang out, followed by Carver's snarl. "Fall back. Damn you, fall back." Hooves thundered into the distance. Wyatt stayed crouched, gun still raised, until silence settled. Then he turned to her. "You hurt?" he asked, rough with urgency, hands sweeping over her arms. "No, I'm fine. I'm good." He pulled her hard against his chest. "Damn brave woman, Abigail Monroe. Damn brave." She clung to him, feeling his heart racing against hers. When he finally let her go, moonlight silvered his face, and what she saw in his eyes stole her breath. But there was no time to linger. They had cattle to round up, some scattered in the fight. By dawn, they had gathered the herd and moved camp to higher ground. "Carver won't quit," Wyatt said as they saddled up again. "Men like him can't stand losing. Then we'll be ready." Abigail answered, firm as stone. She looked at the man who had risked his life for hers, who treated her son with kindness, who gave her respect when others only offered pity. Together, Wyatt said with a rare, true smile. Together, she echoed. Driving the herd home, the cattle stronger now with water in their bellies, Abigail felt a shift deep inside. She wasn't only fighting to survive anymore. She was fighting for a future. And for the first time in months, she wasn't fighting alone. News of the Clear Creek shootout reached town ahead of them. By the time Abigail and Wyatt drove the herd into the paddock, she could see riders lingering at a distance, watchers sent to feed the gossip mill. By nightfall, the whole town would be buzzing that the widow Monroe had spent 3 nights on the trail with her hired man. Let me take Caleb into town for supplies tomorrow, Wyatt suggested as they unsaddled. Might be easier if you lay low a while, let the talk burn itself out. I won't hide in my own home, Abigail snapped. Not when I've done nothing wrong. It ain't about shame, Wyatt said. It's about picking your fights. She faced him, square chin high. I've been picking my fights since the day Ethan died. I won't start running now. His pale eyes studied her sharp as steel, then softened. Stubborn woman, he murmured, but there was admiration in his tone. That night, Caleb peppered them with eager questions, eyes wide with excitement. Abigail trimmed away the dangerous parts, but Wyatt entertained the boy with tales of cattle drives and sleeping under the stars. Watching Wyatt patiently show Caleb how to oil a bridle, seeing her son hang on every word made Abigail's chest ache with something new. Later, when the boy was asleep, she found Wyatt on the porch rifle across his lap, keeping vigil as had become his habit. She handed him a cup of coffee. You don't have to stand guard every night, she said softly. Yes, I do. Their fingers brushed as he took the cup. Carver's not one to forgive and forget. They stood together in the quiet. Crickets chirped a coyote called far off, and the wind sighed through dry grass. The moon, full and silver, laid a soft light across the rugged land, making it almost beautiful. Parson Hugh Latham came by while we were gone, Abigail Monroe said at last. Martha Dobbs told me he'll be calling tomorrow to discuss my situation. Wyatt McGraw's jaw tightened. You want me out of sight? No. The word was clear and sharp. I'm done pretending. Pretending what his voice was low, dangerous with intensity. Abigail set her cup down, turning fully to him. Pretending you're just hired help. When I lie awake at night thinking of you. When I watch you with Caleb and wish things were different. Abigail. Her name was a groan on his lips. You know what folks will say. They're already saying it. She stepped closer, so close she felt his warmth. I've tried to be proper, Wyatt. I wore black, kept my head down, played the widow they expected. But I'm 26, and I'm tired of being alone. He set his cup aside and caught her face gently in his hands. Are you sure, once we cross this line, there's no turning back? Instead of answering, Abigail rose onto her toes and pressed her mouth to his. At first tentative, then deepening as Wyatt's arms wrapped around her, pulling her close. She tasted coffee dust and something that was entirely him. The world spun until they broke apart, both breathless. With his forehead resting against hers, he whispered rough, Woman, you'll be the death of me. I hope not, she breathed. I've buried one man already. The next morning, Parson Latham came as promised, bringing with him Clara May Whitlow and Silas Whitmore from the bank. Abigail faced them on the porch, her best dress clean and pressed. But Wyatt stood beside her, clean-shaven, steady, unashamed Mrs. Monroe. Parson Latham began, his thin features pinched with disapproval. We've come to discuss the irregularities in your household. What irregularities would those be? Abigail asked evenly. Clara May leaned forward, her bulk radiating self-righteousness. Don't play innocent Abigail Monroe. Everyone knows you're carrying on with this drifter. This drifter has a name, Wyatt said mildly. And I'd ask you to show Mrs. Monroe some respect. Whitmore cleared his throat. The bank has concerns about the stability of your situation. A lone, unmarried woman with no male protection. I didn't realize my marital status determined my ability to pay debts. Abigail cut in. The note's not due for another month. Yes, but with certain moral questions arising. Whitmore faltered. Parson Latham stepped forward wearing the look of false kindness. "My dear, we only care for your soul and for Caleb's welfare. What sort of example are you setting?" "An example of grit and perseverance," Abigail replied, her voice steel. "An example of not quitting when life turns hard. An example of fornication," Clara May snapped. "Living in sin with a man who ain't your husband." Wyatt took a step forward, and something in the way he moved made them all flinch. "Ma'am, I'd be careful with accusations you can't prove. Where I come from, calling a lady names carries consequences." "Are you threatening us?" Parson Latham demanded. "Just stating fact," Wyatt said calmly. "Mrs. Monroe is a widow fighting to keep her son's inheritance. I'm a man working for room and board. Anything more is your imagination, and that says more about your minds than our conduct." Before another word could be spoken, the thunder of hooves drew every eye. 6 riders crested the rise, and Abigail's heart sank at the sight of Bill Carver leading them. "Well, well," Carver called, reining in with a mocking grin. "Looks like a regular town meeting. You telling them about our little run-in McGraw?" Parson Latham blinked between them. "You know this man?" "Oh, we go way back," Carver sneered. "Wyatt McGraw's got quite a name. Quick with a gun, quicker with his temper, left more than one man bleeding in the dust." "Is that true?" "Clara," May gasped, clutching her bosom. Wyatt stood taller, eyes cold. "I've defended myself when I had no choice. Never started a fight, but I've ended a few." "Listen at him so modest," Carver laughed. "Why don't you tell him about Dodge City, about Frank Morrison?" Abigail saw Wyatt's hands clench, though his voice stayed steady. "Morrison was beating a saloon girl. I stepped in. He drew on me. I shot him. Killed him dead," Carver confirmed with relish. "One shot through the heart. Through. And that girl sure was grateful afterward. Wasn't she, McGraw?" The foul implication hung heavy as smoke. Clara May nearly swooned, and even Parson Latham's face turned pale. "I think you should all leave," Abigail said, her voice quiet but sharp as a blade. "Now." But Mrs. Monroe Whitmore started. "Now." Her hand rested on the rifle by the porch rail. Carver chuckled low. "Feisty one, ain't she? No wonder you like her. McGraw always did have a taste for the spirited ones." "Carver." Wyatt's voice was quiet, deadly. "You've got 10 seconds to turn that horse around." Wyatt McGraw's voice was calm, but edged with steel. Something in his tone cut through even Bill Carver's swagger. Carver lifted his hands in mock surrender. "We're riding out, but this ain't done. Widow might want to rethink her choices. Be a damn shame if something happened to this little spread." When they were gone, Abigail Monroe sank onto the porch step, her body shaking. Wyatt sat beside her, not touching, but close enough that his warmth steadied her. "I'm sorry," he muttered. "My past." "We all have pasts," Abigail broke in. "You stepped in for a woman who couldn't defend herself. That's not shameful. The town won't see it that way. Then the town can go to hell." The words burned on her tongue, and saying them felt like freedom. That night, once Caleb was asleep, a storm rolled in. Not rain, but wind and lightning tearing across the sky. Abigail stood at her window watching heaven split open in violent bursts when a soft knock came. Wyatt stood there, hair whipped by the gale. "Wanted to be sure you were all right. Storm's got the horses spooked." She should have sent him back to the barn, clung to what propriety she had left. Instead, she stepped aside. He came in the lamplight, flickering over them while the storm raged outside. Then Wyatt reached for her, and she went into his arms like she'd been waiting her whole life. His kiss was raw, hungry, full of years of longing, pressed down too long. "Abigail," he breathed against her lips. "Tell me to go back. Tell me to leave." "Stay," she whispered. "Please, Wyatt. Stay." He drew back just far enough to meet her eyes. His pale gaze burned with desire, and something deeper. "I'd give anything to court you proper. to marry you in that church with the whole town watching. You deserve that. What I deserve," Abigail answered firmly, "is to choose my own road. And I choose you." Thunder crashed like judgment, but inside that small cabin there was only warmth and the whisper of promises. In the darkness with the storm, as their witness Wyatt's words branded themselves into her heart, "I'd trade 10 herds for one night with you." And Abigail, who thought her heart had been buried with Ethan Cole, learned it had only been sleeping, waiting for a drifter with pale eyes and steady hands to bring it back to life. Dawn came too soon, bringing ruin with it. The storm had ripped through the ranch like an angry beast. The chicken coop was smashed to splinters, feathers scattered across the yard. Half the corral lay in ruins, and the barn roof Wyatt had patched now gaped with holes. "Mama, where are the chickens?" Caleb's small voice trembled. "We'll find them, sweetheart," Abigail said, though dread told her many were gone, snatched by coyotes or lost in the gale. Wyatt came from the barn, his face grim. Lost 4 head of cattle. Fence gave way, they scattered. Found 2 busted up in the gulch, had to put 'em down. His eyes met hers, and she saw her own despair mirrored back. "The rest are scattered clear to hell." Abigail pressed her hands to her face. Each loss another nail in the coffin of her independence. With the banknote due in weeks, and this destruction, the weight was unbearable. "We'll rebuild," Wyatt said firmly, stepping close. "We'll round up what's left and—" With what Abigail's voice broke. "I've got no money for lumber, no credit at Loretta Jane Hollis's store." "Even if I did?" She gestured helplessly at the wreckage. A dust cloud rose on the horizon. Riders. Too many for good news. Abigail's stomach knotted when she recognized George Dalton, lord of the sprawling Double D Ranch, leading 6 mounted men. Riding among them was Silas Whitmore, smug as a crow. Mrs. Monroe. Dalton tipped his hat as he reined in. Big man, silver hair, and the bearing of one used to bending others to his will. "Heard you caught the storm hard." "Nothing we can't handle," Wyatt answered, stepping forward. Dalton's eyes slid past him, settling on Abigail. "I'll be straight, ma'am. This place is too much for a woman alone. I'm ready to make you a fair offer enough to wipe your debts and set you up comfortable in town. The land's not for sale," Abigail said without pause. "Now don't be hasty," Silas Whitmore chimed in. "Payments due in 3 weeks. With cattle lost and this damage, you've no way to cover it." Dalton shrugged his smile thin. "I'm offering you a way out with dignity. Take it and you can start fresh. Refuse." He spread his hands. "The bank forecloses and you're left with nothing." Abigail felt Wyatt tense beside her, but she pressed a hand to his arm. "And if I refuse?" she asked. Dalton's friendly mask slipped. "Then you're a fool, ma'am. One way or another, this land will be mine. I'm trying to do right by you, given your circumstances." "Considering I'm a woman, you mean?" Abigail Monroe's reply was cold as iron. "Thank you for your offer, Mr. Dalton, but my answer stands. This land is not for sale." "You've got 3 weeks," Silas Whitmore reminded her as they turned to leave. "Think hard on it." When they were gone, Abigail sank onto the porch steps. Caleb Monroe crawled into her lap, sensing the weight on her shoulders. "Mama, are we going to lose our home?" "No, baby," she said fiercely, clutching him tight. "This is your daddy's land and no one's taking it." But even as she spoke, doubt gnawed at her. How could she keep that promise? The following days blurred into relentless labor. Wyatt McGraw worked from dawn till dark, patching what could be patched with salvaged boards and wire. Abigail joined him, her palms blistered raw as they rebuilt the bare essentials. They managed to round up 8 head of the scattered herd, still far short of what was needed. On the 4th morning after the storm, Wyatt saddled his horse, his face set with grim purpose. "Where are you going?" Abigail asked, though she already guessed. Dixon Ranch is hiring for a cattle drive. 2 weeks' work, good pay. His eyes met hers. It might be enough to close the gap. Wyatt, no. She stepped close, lowering her voice so Caleb wouldn't hear. After what's happened between us, I can't let you— You're not letting me do anything, he cut in gently. I'm choosing to help the woman who— He glanced at Caleb. The woman who matters to me. Her throat tightened. And if Carver comes back, I'll handle Carver. He touched her cheek briefly. Take care of each other. I'll be back before the notes do. Watching him ride away felt like a piece of her soul was leaving with him. Abigail straightened her shoulders and turned back to the endless work. But the ranch felt emptier, more exposed without his presence. A week dragged by with no word. Abigail threw herself into saving what she could, even selling her mother's silver comb and her last good dress to buy feed for the few cattle that remained. Caleb grew quieter, asking each evening, "When's Wyatt coming back?" Then came the night she woke to the acrid scent of smoke. Fire. Snatching. Caleb she bolted outside the barn was ablaze, flames leaping high into the night. Horses screamed inside, trapped. Without thinking, Abigail thrust Caleb onto the porch. Stay here. She wrapped a wet blanket over her head and ran for the barn. The heat was unbearable, the smoke choking, but she could hear Bess's terrified whinnies. She clawed at the stall latches, tears streaming, lungs burning. First Bess, then Ethan Cole's old gelding, then the pack mule. She drove them toward the open door, praying the fire wouldn't block their way. Just as she turned, a burning beam crashed down, sparks showering her. Stumbling half-blind, she felt strong arms seize her and drag her out. Damn fool woman. Wyatt's voice raw with fear and anger. He hauled her clear, both of them coughing. Wyatt, she gasped through the smoke. Saw the fire from the ridge. Margaret, what the hell were you thinking? The horses! To hell with the horses! His hands shook as they ran over her, checking for burns. You could have died. But I didn't, she rasped, then doubled over, coughing. They fought the blaze with buckets, but by dawn nothing remained but blackened timbers. Abigail sat in the dirt, Caleb in her lap, staring hollow-eyed at the ruin. Wyatt crouched beside her, holding a charred kerosene can. It was set, he said grimly. Carver's hand, I'd wager. It doesn't matter who, Abigail whispered dully. It's gone. Wyatt shook his head. I brought most of my pay. It ain't enough for lumber in the bank, but keep it, she said flatly. You earned it. Abigail, no. She rose, lifting Caleb onto her hip. I won't take your money. You've done enough. Her eyes swept the ruins. Maybe Dalton was right. Maybe I am a fool. Don't. Wyatt rose too fierce now. Don't you dare give up. Not the woman who faced Carver's guns and dragged 3 horses out of a burning barn. That woman is the strongest I know. And she's not alone. Caleb reached for Wyatt, laying a small hand against his cheek. Don't go away again. We need you. Wyatt's gaze never left Abigail's as he answered, I'm not going anywhere. Son, your mama's stuck with me now. Despite the soot, the ruins, the looming debt, Abigail felt a spark catch in her chest, hope, stubborn and alive. She leaned into his touch, finding strength in it. All right, she whispered. We fight. We fight, Wyatt echoed. And then with dawn breaking behind them, smoke curling up to meet the sky, he kissed her. It was promise and defiance all at once, a refusal to let the world break them. When they pulled apart, Caleb giggled the first sound of joy in days. Abigail realized then that even if she lost the land, even if Dalton Whitmore and every gossip in town drove her out, she'd found something richer than any ranch. She'd found a partner, a man who would ride through fire for her. Literally. and maybe, just maybe, that'll be enough to see us through." Wyatt McGraw shifted Caleb into his arms with the ease of a man who belonged there. "Come on, let's see what we can salvage. We've got 2 weeks to work miracles." As they walked toward the ruined barn, Abigail Monroe's hand found Wyatt's, their fingers locking together. Whatever came next, they'd face it side by side. Somehow that made all the difference. Winter rode in like an unwelcome outlaw, bringing winds that cut sharper than knives. The first snow fell early in November, covering the blackened remains of the barn and the weary ranch in a deceiving blanket of white. Abigail stood at the window, watching Wyatt and Caleb roll snow into a lopsided man, their laughter carrying thin and bright in the cold. They'd scraped together a makeshift shelter for the stock, pieced from salvaged lumber and what neighbors could spare. Hank Dobbs had pitched in along with a few others, who remembered Abigail's kindness back when times were kinder. But it wasn't near enough to keep beasts or humans fed through the hard season. Food was growing scarce. Abigail stretched every scrap bone broth, boiled thin gardens, stripped before frost a larder running bare. "Mama, I'm hungry," Caleb murmured one evening, staring into a bowl of watery soup. "I know, sweet boy. Eat what you can." She glanced at Wyatt, who wordlessly slid half his portion into Caleb's bowl when the child wasn't looking. The next morning brought trouble on hoof. Too many riders for a neighborly visit. Abigail grabbed Ethan Cole's old rifle and stepped onto the porch. Wyatt stood beside her, his pistol loose, but ready. George Dalton led the pack, his breath puffing in the icy air. This time he'd brought more than ranch hands. Bill Carver rode at his side, and 2 men Abigail recognized as hired killers from the territory. Mrs. Monroe Dalton said, tipping his hat with false courtesy. "I've come with a final offer." "My answer hasn't changed," Abigail said, steady as bedrock. "The banknote's due in 5 days," Dalton pressed. "You can't pay it, and we both know it. I'll give you $500 for the place, enough to start over. That's half what it's worth." Wyatt cut in his voice cold. Dalton's eyes slid past him dismissively. "It's more than she'll have when the bank forecloses. And considering all the accidents happening out here, it's generous." "Are you threatening us?" Abigail demanded. "Just speaking plain," Dalton replied smoothly. "This land borders my spread. I need the water. One way or another, I'll get it. The question is whether you walk away with coin in your pocket or with nothing but the clothes on your back." Carver leaned forward, grinning wolfish. "Maybe not even the clothes if you take my meaning." Wyatt's hand twitched toward his gun, but Abigail's grip stopped him. "Get off my land," she said, quiet but deadly. "All of you." Dalton shook his head. "Pride comes before a fall, Mrs. Monroe. Remember that when you're begging bread in town." When they rode off, Abigail sagged into a chair, crushed by the weight pressing down. Wyatt knelt beside her, taking her cold hands in his. "We'll find a way," he promised. How she asked, desperation breaking through. "We've got nothing left to sell. No credit. Nothing." A knock on the door cut her off. Wyatt moved to answer, gun in hand, but instead of more trouble, Hank Dobbs stood there, hat in hand. "Mind if I step in?" the old farmer asked, warming by the stove. Hank got straight to the point. "That snake Dalton came to me yesterday, too. Offered to buy my water rights. When I refused, one of his men said how tragic it'd be if something happened to my granddaughter on her way to school." Abigail gasped. "Hank, no. Yeah. They're bold now." He pulled a leather pouch from his coat. "Anna and I been talking. You sat with our twins through fever 3 nights running, never asked for payment. This here ain't charity, it's neighbor's debt repaid." He set it on the table. Abigail shook her head. "I can't take your money." "Not taken," Borrowin' Hank said firmly, his weathered face creasing in a smile. "No interest." Pay back when you can. That's what neighbors are for. Wyatt opened the pouch, counting quick. $50. More than we need, Hank said. What we need is good neighbors. Before Abigail could answer, another knock came. Mary Patterson stood on the stoop holding a basket of preserves and dried meat. Heard you might be in need, she said simply. This ain't charity. It's payment for when you splinted my husband's leg last spring. All through the day, folks trickled in. Not many the shadow of Dalton, and the whispering tongues in town kept most away. But some came with a few dollars, others with food ammunition or small offerings. By sundown, the table was heavy with gifts. For the first time in weeks, Abigail dared to believe they just might have enough to meet the bank's demand. Almost ain't enough, Abigail Monroe said, counting the coins again. They were still $20 short. My pay from the cattle drive, Wyatt McGraw said, pulling a small roll of bills from his pocket. That makes it enough. Wyatt, no, that's yours. Nothing I have is mine anymore, he said simply. It's ours, if you'll have me. The words hung in the air like snowflakes suspended in the cold. Caleb Monroe looked between them, eyes bright with curiosity. What do you mean? Abigail asked, her heart pounding. Wyatt dropped to one knee right there in the kitchen with the table piled high with neighbors' coins, and Caleb staring wide-eyed. I mean, I love you, Abigail Monroe. I mean, I want to stand beside you against whatever comes. I want to be Caleb's father and your husband if you'll have a broken-down cowboy with more past than future. Abigail's hands flew to her mouth, tears spilling. Wyatt? I know it ain't the proposal you deserve, he went on. No ring, no fine words. But I'll give you my whole heart, my gun to defend you, and my hands to build this place into something your boy can be proud of. Say yes, Mama. Caleb burst out, bouncing with excitement. Say yes, so Wyatt can be my papa. Abigail dropped to her knees, cradling Wyatt's face in her hands. Yes, she whispered. Yes to all of it. He kissed her, then Caleb, cheering and dancing around them. For a moment, hunger and cold faded into nothing. They had love, they had each other, and just enough money to keep the wolves, both the kind that walked on two legs and the kind that prowled on four, at bay. The next morning, fresh horse tracks circled the house in the snow. Wyatt studied them grimly. Dalton's men. Testing our defenses. Let them test, Abigail said fiercely. We're not giving up. That night, the other wolves came, the four-legged kind, driven down from the mountains by a savage winter. Their howls cut the night, circling the pen where the horses trembled. Abigail and Wyatt stood watch with rifles ready. When the pack lunged, the fight was brutal. Wyatt's aim was true, dropping two. Abigail wounded another, sending it yelping into the dark. But one great gray brute slipped through jaws, snapping for Bess. Without thought, Abigail threw herself between it and her mare, swinging the rifle like a club. The weight of the beast knocked her down, its hot breath on her face. Then Wyatt's shot cracked the night, and the wolf went limp. He yanked her up, hands frantic. Are you bit? I'm fine, just bruised, she gasped. You're insane, he growled, crushing her against him. Throwing yourself at a wolf. Bess is all I have left of the old life, she whispered. I couldn't lose her too. They stood in the snow, surrounded by dead wolves and frightened horses clinging to each other, while Caleb watched wide-eyed from the window. And Abigail realized they had already won the most important fight they had chosen to stand together. 3 more days till the bank, she murmured against Wyatt's chest. 3 more days, he agreed. We'll make it. But as they dragged the carcasses away, neither spoke of the fresh tracks circling the house, or the glint from the ridge that might have been sunlight on glass, or the watchful eyes that promised trouble yet to come. The courthouse in Cedar Ridge loomed like a fortress of law against the winter sky. Its red brick stood solid and cold, As Abigail climbed the steps with Wyatt at her side, Caleb walking between them in his Sunday best. She carried the bank payment in a leather pouch, tucked inside her coat, close to her heart. Inside, warmth pressed against their frozen skin. The courtroom was already packed, drawn by word that George Dalton aimed to crush the widow Monroe. Faces turned, some sympathetic, many smug with Dalton's money behind them. Right on time, Silas Whitmore said, stepping forward with papers in hand. His smile was thin as a knife. "I trust you have the payment." "Every cent," Abigail answered, touching the pouch. "Ah, but first a matter must be addressed." Whitmore gestured toward the bench where Judge Carleton was taking his seat. "Mr. Dalton has filed a claim questioning your legal right to the property." Abigail's blood went cold. What George Dalton rose from the front row, flanked by two lawyers in city suits. "It's simple, Your Honor. There are irregularities in the deed. The boundaries filed don't match the federal survey. Ethan Cole may have claimed land that was never rightly his." "That's a lie." Abigail stepped forward, but Wyatt caught her arm. "Let me handle this," he murmured, then raised his voice to the bench. "Your Honor, this is nothing more than a rich man trying to steal a widow's land. That land's been in Ethan Cole's name for 6 years, Judge Carleton," said a heavy man with sagging jowls peering over his spectacles. "And you are Wyatt McGraw, Mrs. Monroe's intended." A murmur swept the courtroom at that revelation. The judge's tone made plain he didn't much approve. "Well, Mr. McGraw, Mr. Dalton has presented documentation. Unless Mrs. Monroe can prove her claim, I have the original deed," Abigail Monroe said, pulling folded papers from her coat, signed and witnessed. One of Dalton's lawyers, a sharp-nosed fellow named Crawford, rose to his feet. "Your Honor, we don't deny a deed exists. What we dispute is its accuracy. Our surveyor found that the Monroe property cuts into Mr. Dalton's range by nearly 40 acres, including water rights to Clear Creek." "The creek has always been our boundary," Abigail protested. "According to your late husband's filing, yes," Crawford replied smoothly. "But according to the federal survey of 1876, he produced a map with heavy seals. The true boundary lies a quarter-mile east of the creek." Abigail stared at the map in horror. Without those water rights, her land was worth next to nothing. A clever trap keep the ground, but lose the water, and she'd be forced to sell. "This is fraud," Wyatt said flatly. "That map's been doctored." "That's a grave accusation," Crawford snapped. "Can you prove it? Can you prove it ain't?" Wyatt shot back. Judge Carleton banged his gavel. "Order, Mr. Crawford, what evidence do you offer beyond this map?" "The sworn word of our surveyor, Mr. Bernard Hicks." Crawford gestured toward a thin, nervous man who kept darting glances at Dalton. Hicks took the stand, his testimony precise, technical, and damning. By his measurements, Ethan Cole had indeed filed on land that wasn't his. Mrs. Monroe, the judge, said gravely, "Do you have any witness to challenge this testimony?" Abigail's mind spun. Who could fight a surveyor's word? Then it struck her. "Hank Dobbs," she said. "He homesteaded the place next to ours before my husband came. He knows the true boundary." Gasps rippled through the room as Hank rose and walked forward, weathered face set like carved oak. He took the oath with solemn dignity. "Mr. Dobbs," Abigail said, speaking for herself, since she couldn't afford a lawyer. "How long you been on your place? 23 years come spring," Hank answered. "I was here before there was a town, before Dalton built his empire. And the boundary between your land and ours," Clear Creek, Hank said firmly, "always has been. I helped Ethan Cole measure it myself when he bought from the Masterson widow. We used the federal marker stone cairns the Army surveyors set. "Hearsay, Your Honor," Crawford barked. "Where are these supposed markers?" Hank's jaw darkened. "Funny thing. I checked last month, they're gone. Dug up. Fresh work, too." The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Abigail saw Dalton cut a glance toward Carver. "Without markers? It's your word against ours," Crawford sneered. "Not just my word," Hank said calmly. He pulled a battered notebook from his coat. "I keep records where the crop's boundaries. Right here, August 15th, 1876, helped Army surveyors set stone cairns 3 feet high, quarter-mile apart, along Clear Creek. Even noted their names, Lieutenant Morrison and Surveyor McKnight." Crawford's confidence faltered. Those men could be dead, or long gone. "McKnight's not dead," a voice called from the back. Doc Hartley stood up. "He's my brother-in-law. Lives in Denver. I could wire him for confirmation." Judge Carlton shifted uneasily. "This matter grows complex. Perhaps we should postpone, Your Honor." Dalton cut in standing. "This is nonsense. We're asked to trust an old farmer and a woman of questionable morals over an official survey." Questionable morals? Abigail's temper flared. "How dare you? You've been living with a man not your husband," Dalton said coldly. "Everyone knows it. Is this the sort of person who should hold land? A woman flaunting decency tied to a gunman with blood on his hands. That's enough," Wyatt said, voice quiet and deadly. But Dalton pressed on. "Your Honor, even if the lines were in dispute, Mrs. Monroe has proven she can't manage the ranch. Her barn burned her herds near gone. She owes accounts all over town. And now she's tied herself to a drifter. For the good of the community. For the good of your bank account, you mean?" Abigail snapped. "You want my water because you've run your pastures bare. You tried to buy me out, burn me out, and now you'd law me out." "Can you prove any of this?" Crawford demanded. "Can you prove Hicks truly surveyed that line?" Wyatt countered. "Or did he just draw where Dalton told him Hicks went pale?" I stand by my survey." "Do you?" Wyatt stepped closer, eyes boring into him. "Would you swear on it, stake your name and livelihood that you measured every foot yourself?" Hicks glanced at Dalton, his face crumbling. There may have been some estimates based on existing filings." The courtroom erupted. Judge Carlton hammered his gavel again and again. Order, order. When silence finally settled, the judge looked weary. "It seems we've got conflicting testimony and missing evidence. Still the burden of proof, Your Honor," a new voice broke in. All eyes turned as Parson Hugh Latham rose from the back. Abigail Monroe's stomach dropped. Surely he would side with Dalton. "I have something to say." The parson continued, uneasy but resolved. "This matter's weighed heavy on me. Last week I overheard Bill Carver and another hand laughing about digging up stones near Clear Creek. I thought little of it then, but now—" Carver shot to his feet. "That's a damn lie." "Is it?" Latham straightened his voice, firmer now. "I may not always approve of Mrs. Monroe's choices, but I'll not stomach false witness. What I heard was plain. They were pulling markers on Dalton's orders. Chaos broke loose. Dalton's face turned from red to purple. This is conspiracy. They're all lying." The gavel cracked under Judge Carlton's blows. "Mr. Dalton, control yourself. Mr. Carver, do you deny these accusations?" Carver's hand drifted toward his revolver, but stopped when Wyatt McGraw stepped protectively in front of Abigail. Their eyes locked, years of bad blood sparking like dry tinder. "I don't answer to some pulpit-bred preacher," Carver snarled. "No, but you'll answer to me," Judge Carlton thundered. "Sheriff, detain Mr. Carver for questioning, and Mr. Hicks, there'll be a full inquiry into your survey." He turned back to Abigail. "Mrs. Monroe, do you have your payment?" With trembling hands, Abigail produced the pouch. "Every dollar, Your Honor. Then the bank must take it." As for the boundary, until fraud is proven either way, the status quo stands. The Monroe Ranch remains in Mrs. Monroe's possession. The gavel came down like a shot. Dalton stormed out, his lawyers scurrying after him. Carver had to be hauled away by the sheriff, but not before he shot Wyatt, a look promising blood. As the townsfolk filed out, some stopped to shake Abigail's hand or nod their respect. Dalton's heavy-handedness had earned her more sympathy than she ever expected. Outside in the biting sunlight, Abigail leaned against Wyatt, nearly collapsing with relief. "We did it. We truly did it." "You did it," Wyatt corrected, holding her close. "You and neighbors who wouldn't let a bully win." "Mama, does this mean we get to keep our home?" Caleb Monroe asked, tugging her coat. "Yes, sweetheart," she said, scooping him up. "We get to keep our home. And Wyatt gets to stay forever," the boy pressed. Wyatt met Abigail's eyes over Caleb's head. "If your mama will have me." "Forever," Abigail whispered, before Wyatt kissed her on the courthouse steps, not caring who watched. They had won this battle. But as they rode back through the frozen countryside, Abigail knew Dalton wouldn't quit, and Carver would surely come for revenge. Still, for now, they had their land. They had each other. And they had proven that sometimes justice could stand against money and power. Spring came like a miracle. Shoots of green pushed through melting snow by March. By April, the prairie bloomed with lupines, buttercups, and prairie roses. Clear Creek ran strong again, water singing over the stones that had nearly cost them everything. Abigail stood on the porch of the new barn, rebuilt smaller but sturdy, raised with neighbors' help after the trial. The air smelled of fresh-cut lumber and spring rain. She watched Wyatt and Caleb working a young colt, Wyatt's hands steady and sure, Caleb mimicking every move. Her heart swelled. Tomorrow Wyatt would no longer just be her partner in labor. He would be her husband. Parson Hugh Latham had agreed to marry them, his conscience eased by his testimony at the trial. It wouldn't be grand, just kin and the few friends who had stood by them through hardship. But it would be real and binding, and that was all Abigail wanted. "Abigail," Mary Patterson called from the yard, fussing over tables. "Where do you want the flowers? Anywhere's fine," Mary Abigail answered with a smile. After months of loneliness, having women friends again felt like another kind of spring. Then movement on the horizon caught her eye, a lone rider pushing hard. Abigail's hand went instinctively to the rifle by the door. But as the rider neared, she recognized Sheriff Thompson. "Mrs. Monroe," he said, tipping his hat grimly. "Thought you should know. Bill Carver broke jail last night. Killed a deputy doing it." Abigail's blood turned to ice. Wyatt was already at her side, Caleb safely behind him. "Any idea where he's headed?" Wyatt asked. "Trail cuts north toward the mountains," the sheriff said. His expression was grave. "But a man like Carver doesn't run without settling scores first. I'd post a watch if I were you." When he rode away, Abigail found Wyatt calmly checking his guns, every motion deliberate. "Maybe we should postpone," she began. "No." Wyatt cut her off, his voice hard. "We've let men like Carver dictate our lives long enough. Tomorrow we marry, as planned. But tonight, I'll keep watch." Abigail Monroe touched Wyatt McGraw's cheek. Not alone. That night, as they sat on the porch with rifles close at hand, Wyatt spoke more of his past with Carver. The girl in Dodge City had been no more than 17, one of Carver's saloon favorites, frightened, cornered. Wyatt had stepped in, and the girl later testified against Carver, laying bare other crimes. It landed Carver 2 years behind bars. "He's blamed me for every downfall since," Wyatt said quietly. Lost his railroad job, burned through his connections, and turned to gun work for men like Dalton. "And now he's lost again because of us," Abigail murmured. "Because of his own choices," Wyatt corrected. "Men like Carver can't see they make their own hell." The night passed without incident, and dawn rose on Abigail's wedding day, dressed in the soft gold and pink of spring. She wore her mother's gown pressed and altered by Mary Patterson ivory silk, tiny pearl buttons down the back, worn but beautiful. "You look real pretty, Mama," Caleb Monroe said solemnly, straightening his new clothes gifted by the Dobbs family. "Beautiful," Wyatt corrected from the doorway, his eyes making her blush like a girl again. The ceremony was held beneath a bower of fresh spring branches in the yard. Hank Dobbs walked Abigail forward, his lined face alight with pride. Mary Patterson stood as witness, and Caleb carried the ring's plain gold bands Wyatt had ordered from Denver. "Dearly beloved," Parson Hugh Latham began, but Abigail barely heard her gaze fixed on Wyatt's face. The love there, the promise, the slight tremor in his hands as he took hers. "I, Wyatt McGraw, take you, Abigail Monroe, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he said. "To have and to hold in sickness and in health, in drought and in plenty through storms and sunshine, until death do us part." Abigail's voice rang clear as she spoke her vows. "And I promise to stand beside you against all who'd harm our family. To build a life with you worthy of every sacrifice made to keep this land, and to love you with all I am forever. By the power vested in me," Parson Latham declared, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Wyatt's kiss was tender, full of strength and promise. Cheers broke out, and Caleb wrapped his arms around their legs until Wyatt scooped him up, so the three stood together finally, a family. The celebration was plain but joyful. Neighbors filled long tables with fried chicken, fresh bread, garden vegetables, and 3 kinds of pie. A fiddle struck up, and laughter rose with the music. "Dance with me, Mrs. McGraw," Wyatt said, and Abigail stepped into his arms, smiling wider than she thought possible. "That sounds strange," she teased as they swayed. "Good strange," he answered. "The best kind." As the sun set in blazing orange and purple, Abigail saw Wyatt tense, his gaze fixed beyond the merriment. She followed it to George Dalton mounted at the far fence line. He watched the wedding in silence, then turned his horse and rode away. It wasn't surrender. Abigail knew it was only a pause. Dalton would try again, but surrounded by neighbors with Caleb laughing among children, and Wyatt's steady arm around her, she felt ready. "No regrets?" Wyatt asked softly. "None," Abigail replied. "We've earned this happiness." And as if the land itself agreed, the evening breeze carried the scent of real rain, the drought breaking at last. Later, after guests departed, and Caleb slept soundly, Abigail and Wyatt stood on the porch, watching lightning flicker on the horizon. "Storm coming," Wyatt said. "Let it come," Abigail answered, leaning into him. "We've weathered worse." "That we have," he murmured, turning her toward him, hands gentle on her shoulders. "And we'll face whatever else comes together." Together, she agreed, sealing it with a kiss. By morning came word not of Carver's vengeance, but of his capture shot while robbing a bank in Colorado. The deputy he'd gunned down would live, and Carver would hang. The shadow over them was gone, swept away like dust on the wind. Dalton made one more offer, triple the price, but Abigail took fierce satisfaction in refusing him, with Wyatt standing at her side. He left without another word, and though he stayed their neighbor, he never crossed them again. The ranch flourished under Abigail and Wyatt's care. The cattle fattened, the horses multiplied, and the rebuilt coop thrived. Caleb grew strong, learning rope and saddle from Wyatt, reading land and weather from his mother. On their first anniversary, as the prairie sky burned with another sunset, Wyatt pulled Abigail close and whispered the words that once carried scandal, but now sounded like plain truth words she would treasure all her life. "I'd still trade 10 herds for just one night with you," Wyatt McGraw whispered. Abigail Monroe laughed, her joy rolling across the wide land they had fought tooth and nail to keep. "Good thing you don't have to. You've got me for every night, for the rest of our lives, forever." Wyatt agreed, kissing her as the first stars blinked awake in the endless Texas sky. They had begun in sorrow and loneliness, weathered drought, greed, and gunfire. Yet love had endured not the easy kind of storybooks, but the hard, blazing kind, hammered out through loss and sacrifice, tempered by trust and respect. The widow and the drifter had found what neither thought possible: a second chance at happiness, a family rising from ashes and a future wide and bright beneath the western heavens. And if the folks of Cedar Ridge sometimes still whispered about scandal and how it all began, Abigail and Wyatt were too busy living, working the land, raising Caleb Monroe, and cherishing every sunrise together to care. They had each other. They had their boy, and they had their ranch. It was more than enough. It was everything. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blazed the trail. Subscribe, share, leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you